All right, guys. Hey, I'm here with Dr. Riccadante, and we are doing the Greco-Roman National Team Leadership and Character Development podcast YouTube show. I don't know, we've called it a couple different things, but we definitely focus on leadership and we focus on character development. And right now, during this coronavirus lockdown, to rely on our character quite a bit and keep moving forward. How's things going in California?
So far, so good. A couple changes, but change is good. We adapt, adjust, improvise, and
as a species, and you're a scientist, I mean, does any other species adapt better than human beings?
oh man, that's a loaded question. Depends if you talk to an evolutionary psychologist or something, they'll tell you. You can probably see moths evolve the color of their wings. That's the classic evolution experiment that you saw moths that were gray. Usually in England, they changed to black when the Industrial Revolution came around, and there's black soot in the air. So now they blended better on the tree bark, and then that changed. So they tell you lots of different species probably evolved, but we're pretty good at it. I'm a cognitive psychologist, and so we've got our brain, and that allows us to adapt. It gives us some hurdles to it, but pretty flexible because we can use our mind.
Right. No, I think I think it's great. I think we do adapt pretty well to whatever the situations are. I am still adapting to this working from home life. It's a little more chaotic, especially when I'm in a 800 square foot cabin, and my daughter came up to visit and brought her dogs, and just all of a sudden my life got a lot more chaotic. I'm sitting out here, as you can see behind me, on the deck here at my cabin, up in the coastal mountain ranges, the Pacific Northwest, while we're recording this show. I really am honestly enjoying this time because I think as a species, I don't think we are taking enough time to slow down, relax, take a deep breath. Just that, catch your breath thing. Everything seems to be going at a faster and faster pace constantly. I mean, new technology, and even now, we're out here. It's like, okay, go home and work from home. We don't want you in the office getting people sick. But go figure out all this new technology, and boom, 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 and everything's just coming at you fast. I got like 3 new apps on my phone that people can contact me, communicate with me. It's, those things are a little more stressful than I need. I enjoy this slower pace. I mean, I'm on 27 acres. Right across the street from me was a herd of elk. As I was driving up to my driveway, I just sat and watched the elk for about 30 minutes. Just sat and watched them. They weren't doing much. They were eating, interacting with one another, just kind of grazing in the fields, and absolutely beautiful. And then that evening I went down and caught my dinner on the beach. I told you today, and you were very gracious to reschedule this because my daughter wanted to go get some more clams because she wasn't down here when we went and caught clams. But I mean, that was a whole process. I met some friends, and the best guys to meet to do that are at least in their 70s, because they've got so much wisdom and experience, And so one of my friends, Dave Chamberlain, I heard he was down here at the beach, and he had his son-in-law's, it was one of my best friends, Dean Fisher. He got his clam digging guns. Now, there's 2 ways you can do it. You can do it with a gun or the shovel. I've done both. I don't know which one I prefer because I don't do it enough to say I have a preference right now. But, it took us about an hour and a half to go limit out on our clams. Came home, took me another hour to clean the clams and cook them, and then we had dinner. It was wonderful, and then that evening, to get heat in the cabin, I had to start a fire, which required me to crumple up some paper there and chop some kindling, make a little fire, and then go split some bigger logs, because our stove in the house only 800 square feet, so you don't want too big of a stove in there. The stove we got gets pretty hot pretty quick. But that whole process, at least another half hour, rather than just going over and flipping on a switch. It's definitely a different lifestyle for sure.
Yeah, man, that sounds great. Sounds like something you'd dream up for a great vacation if you could.
But we're all different, and I think some people would much rather flip on the switch and go, okay, my furnace is working, flip on the switch. I don't know. What do you think about that?
It's nice to be able to flip on the switch, and it's nice to, I think, be able to create that yourself when you're able to. I think part of it just depends on context, and I think most people probably like a little bit of both at different times, right? I mean, I think that, it's probably pretty universal about people is that, very rarely do we have like, what's the word I would say? Absolutisms, right? Like we like things to change. We like that, and it's probably nice because you've been kind of doing the office job in Colorado, and it's nice to have the retreat. But I bet if you had to do this for the next 6 or 9 months, you'd get tired of making that fire, or perhaps your wife would get tired of waiting 30 minutes for the fire to turn on, and it might be nice to flip the switch back at home. I think we like that balance.
I mean, certainly.
Angie might not. Angie's pretty tough.
She is certainly a tough gal. But I don't know, man. It just seems like, yes, life is just so easy. And I think that's why I think we're struggling with this coronavirus. And, first of all, we were created to be social, animals. We get more done when we work as teams, or we work together. And now we're supposed to be isolating. We're socially distancing, but we're socially connecting right now, you and I, and we're going to send this out on the internet later this evening and socially connect with our teams. We've been doing a lot of social connecting, but we've been physically distancing rather than socially distancing. I don't know where they came up with that term of socially distancing, because it seems like with all the technology and all the apps available, we're more connected than ever before. Good or bad, we are able to connect, and certain people might prefer this physical distancing, just getting isolated, whether you're introverted, extroverted type of people. I bet you I know my daughter's probably going crazy. She's an extrovert. Where's her people? Where's her friends? Where's her peer group? Her college switched from going onto campus to going online, and she doesn't get to meet with her cohorts and her study teams, and she's not doing clinicals right now. So she's like stressed out about this whole thing, and being isolated for her is totally different than being isolated for, say, me or my son, he's loving this isolation thing, even though he's doing it back in Portland.
Yeah, I mean, I think you raise a good point on that, and I think that's one of the things we've seen maybe the last 10 or 15 years in society. We've seen a lot of people have to become very social just through their teams at work and their cohorts or whatever, and that's a good thing. But I think particularly one of the risks, that we can find with too much extroversion or needing too much outside stimulation of others is that the relationship that we neglect is the one with ourselves. And we see a lot of people probably between 25 and 35 or 40 at some point in life where they kind of have to reach back and settle down and think about for a minute, how do I reconnect with myself? A lot of people probably felt at times that they lost themselves in the shuffle of society as just life came about, and it's probably good at times to kind of find that better balance with the inside introvert and extrovert that is in everyone in a relative balance.
Well, I was talking with my pastor, and we were going through, and he did a sermon on Sunday, and he does a men's group on Wednesday evenings, and one of the first three tips that I wanted to share on this call about how to deal with quarantine, how to deal with isolation, because you're right. I think it could be generational. I think it could be personality wise. But how to turn isolation into solitude, and what is the difference, in your opinion, between isolation and solitude?
Um, I don't know. First pass, maybe an easy distinction is the element of choice. Isolation, isolation, you might think of as maybe not being your choice, but if you're in solitude, maybe that suggests that you're alone by choice, that you wanted to have some solitude.
Well, it wasn't a trick question. Well, I wasn't trying to trick you. I was just trying to see what your opinion was. But I
Yeah.
mean, because you'd actually brought that topic up, and I was thinking, wow, that's interesting because that goes along with just a couple of the ideas. And Pastor Mark said, turning isolation into solitude is time alone with the Lord and with your thoughts and just who you are, and just trying to connect with what's going on inside your brain. And being a cognitive scientist, I mean, you know a lot about the brain, so I'd like to hear more about what your thoughts are on that part of it. But isolation, I've noticed, especially even for me, sometimes when I am isolated, I'm not in solitude, I can get a little tired. I can get a little weary. I can get a little, I wouldn't say depressed, but just maybe lonesome. Uh, so, turn off the bad news of the world, because we got CNN and MSNBC, Fox News. It's all bad news. There's no good news coming at us. The only good news here is going to happen in a couple of weeks when we celebrate the resurrection of Christ. But that is the real good news. And slowing things down has given me an opportunity to go in. Even though I'm here with my wife last week and my daughter and my wife this week, I've been able to have my sauna sessions and really go into some solitude and spend that time in solitude.
That's awesome. One of the things you mentioned earlier before in terms of even just making a fire every night and kind of living in that solitude. When I was in graduate school, I think, up at Davis, I lived in a house for a year or two where we didn't have central heat, we didn't have hot water. It was very it was in a subdivision, but it was otherwise very rural. And we had a wood burning stove, and so I had to, they say when you have a wood burning stove, it warms you twice because you got to chop wood in the morning and you get pretty warmed up on a cold morning chopping a bunch of wood, and then of course it warms you later on when you burn it. And those are good experiences, and they can help you kind of connect, especially because it kind of brings that extra element of solitude, makes you kind of see that input-output relationship of the work you put in versus the value that it confers, rather than just pushing a button, turn something on and off. And that was really nice, and it made it more special to be able to enjoy the fire and the warmth later, because you're like, wow, this actually has some value to it as well. So I think those kind of things, you learn a lot about yourself, and this is an opportunity where maybe people might find that they can do that in that sort of retreat of solitude that you're talking about. You remember Reinhold we had, I think, on the second episode of the show?
I don't recall what episode, but I certainly remember the podcast for sure. I don't remember which number it was, but it was early on.
So Reinhold Povlatus, he was a crew member of ours in Hera, which was an isolation and confinement study that we did at NASA, and then he went on and he did 4 months of isolation and confinement in Russia. It's called the NEK stuff. I forget what the abbreviation stands for, but it's him and some cosmonauts and other Russian scientists, and he represented the United States and NASA there. And so he has a really good sort of insight on some of these isolation and confinement elements, together with our time spent together. And one thing he said that kind of stuck with me, I thought was kind of interesting, was I asked him, I said, are you worried about the 4 months? It's going to be a long time. And he said, well, it's really only a prison of your mind. And, we talked about it a little bit, and, I think it kind of gets to the heart of what you were asking earlier, kind of what's sort of that cognitive psychology of these situations, of that solitude versus isolation or what have you, in that, our attitudes, our choices shape how our minds process things, right? So you have this symbiotic relationship between the external world and the internal world. That is, your internal brain states are going to certainly help determine how you process the external worlds. But, we can change that and moderate that in some regards with our attitudes and our choices. And Reinhold made the choice to look at, say, 4 months in isolation and confinement as, that wasn't essentially a prison sentence. That wasn't being locked up. That was an opportunity to do some really exciting science, to advance what we have as our knowledge base so that we can do these long-term missions to the moon, to Mars, what have you. And, that represents a lot of what we spend a lot of time talking in the show about, which is the difference between the attitude of opportunities versus obligations. And so I think that's one way that people can manage that confinement right off the bat. And how do you go from something that feels like an obligation? Oh, the government's forcing me to do this, so we have to stay locked in. Or do we get to now have the opportunity to maybe have to be creative, but it's still an opportunity where maybe we can find ourselves a little bit more, get in touch with that solitude, that peace, and kind of have a chance to build that relationship with ourselves or the people around us in that smaller environment.
Yeah, I totally agree. And when you were talking about warms you up twice, I was thinking about, in my head, I was like, man, actually 3 times, because not only are you getting warmed up because you're out there working and chopping the wood, but it warms your soul a little bit. To me, I love hard manual labor. I don't know what it is about, climbing a tree and limbing it down. I mean, as you can see here, as my driveway here, Rick, I limbed a bunch of those trees.
Wow.
Coming into the property, because we don't make it up here too often, and the branches were starting to get heavy and sag, and it was hard to drive through our driveway, and it let in a lot of light. And it's cloudy and rainy right now, and this is how Oregon always is. Just so anybody watching that's thinking about moving to Oregon, it's always rainy and cloudy, and this is how it is. But honestly, when we got here the first 3 days, it was just gorgeous. It was like a spring day, but now it feels a little more like we're still in winter, and that just changed in the last couple of days of being up here. But for people that I guess are looking for ways to grow from this experience, would you recommend reading, YouTube, just getting into the Word? I mean, what do you recommend for people? Maybe they want to pick up a new skill or really optimize this time, redeem this time that they're having to spend in solitude. And let's not talk about isolation. Let's use the term more solitude, because I think it fits better for what we're trying to do with people's attitudes and their mind and their body and their spirit.
It's a really good point. I like that. And I've been trying to keep up on the news, and we do a lot of research in these domains, and I haven't heard people refer to it as solitude as opposed to isolation. And I might take that from you. I think that's a really good addition you got going there.
I think you can co-op it. I think you can take isolation and turn it into solitude, and that's a much more positive. Especially when, I didn't come up with this. I was talking to Pastor Mark, and it's solitude is not time alone. It's time with the Lord, and time just in worship and praise.
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing I would think of to sort of address your question, I think there's a lot of things to do. I have a lot of ideas, tips, and tricks of things that we learned along the way, things that we did wrong, things that we did right. The first thing that I would say is kind of not unlike wrestling or sports, what you might say to somebody who comes up to you and says, hey, coach, I want to be an Olympic champion, or I want to be a national champion or a world champion. What do I got to do? Right? Now, your brain is probably right off the bat, you've got a whole laundry list of like, well, son, there's a lot you got to do to be there's probably not one thing, right? But the one thing that probably needs to start the journey and to sustain the journey is you have to believe in yourself, right? You have to believe that you can do it. because there's going to be a lot of things on the road that comes up to be an Olympic champ or achieving your goals that are going to make you daunt yourself. It's going to make you question yourself and present a challenge to that. And I think that this situation is kind of a parallel to that, because first thing I would remind people of is that they can do it, right? Especially if they're used to being extroverts or they're used to being social creatures and being able to do that. And frankly, there's a real concern people have of economics, right? A lot of people are losing work, losing money. There's a lot that can happen real soon as things potentially pivot in the nation. So, the first thing I would say is to believe in yourself. You can do this. You can ride this out. It might be hard. It might be difficult, but you can do it. And we together as a team, as a nation, that we can do that. And so the reason I say that is because this can be a thing that can be for good. And one thing we know from actually others sort of case studies of solitude, real solitary confinement. You know what the Hanoi Hilton is?
Yep.
Okay, so for people who might not know what the Hanoi Hilton was, that's where they kept American prisoners of war during the Vietnam War for up to 6 to 10 years. It was notoriously brutal, torture, pretty harsh conditions, and sometimes people were kept for 6, 7, 8 years by themselves while getting tortured independently, and they couldn't talk to each other. They developed a secret code of tapping signals between walls, between different American POWs. And one of the things that we learned psychologically is that when the war was over and those prisoners were all returned back to America, everybody thought they were going to be damaged goods. Everybody thought that they had to be handled with kid gloves. Everybody thought that these were really going to be traumatized, problematic individuals, recluses who, for lack of a better word, would just be really weird and psychologically troubled. And not to say that it wasn't a psychologically troubling time, but what they found from that sort of case study of all those POWs is they had what has now been termed not post-traumatic stress disorder, they had post-traumatic growth. And so it was pretty surprising to the psychologists who studied those people, because they called their families and their people ahead of time and said, hey, just so you know, they're going to come home. You got to be, this could be a little weird. But the actual men, the American servicemen, exhibited post-traumatic growth such that they grew from the experience, and they were able to build rich, fulfilled lives, and they actually had a lower incidence of PTSD than did American service members who were in the war but were not captured, incredibly enough. And so what that tells us about these isolation sort of things is that they can be things for, you can grow from them. And you got to believe that that's possible. You got to believe that you can get through it and that you will, and have that strength. And even what those guys did in isolation was maintain some connection with their comrades. Sometimes that was just through a secret tapping code in the wall because they weren't allowed to talk, or through other coded messages they would send. But that built a teamwork, and they stayed sharp mentally when they could. There was a guy who mentally rehearsed all of the architecture down to the color of the paint of exactly the house he would build one day. And every day he rehearsed that mentally. And when he came out, he built that house. And, guys who were in there with him, who he had told that to, were invited to come see the house. And they went and they saw it, and they're like, "Holy, wow, this is what you said you were going to build at exactly the same dimensions." So that was the engagement of the mind, because they believed that this was possible to survive. They believed that they couldn't just survive it, but that they could thrive afterwards. And I think that belief is important, whether it's sports or life or anything challenging.
I think that's a good lesson that people can take from this, but I don't think we're quite dealing with that same kind of isolation. I mean, look, we're connected right here on a Skype call. I've been having regular meetings with my coaches, my leadership at USA Wrestling. I've been having multiple calls where Zoom, where you can get everybody on a meeting and get everyone information, and so they're not feeling like they're left out because it's like we don't have a whole lot to tell you, but we're just trying to be transparent with everyone here and saying this is what's new. I mean, the latest was the Olympics got postponed. I think that's, as far as I know, the first time that's ever happened. I think they canceled them during World War One and World War Two, but I don't think it's ever been postponed.
Yeah, it's interesting. Tell me more about it, because I've been out of the loop. I know it was postponed a little bit, but what's going on? Is there a plan for what happens? We're talking 2021 now, or just in the fall?
Well, as far as I know, yes, it's going to be 2021, and the timeline is somewhere in 2021, no later than the summer of 2021. Potentially could go earlier, but I just think the way things are set up, the games are summer games. It will probably end up happening probably around the same time frame, I would imagine. So we're just going to have to regroup, replan. This could be a blessing for some athletes. This could be awful for others. Guys that are aging and but guys that were hurt now, maybe this gives them time to heal and regroup. I mean, we could have a completely different team a year later, and we see that year in and year out with the World Championships going on. Your best guy could be hurt. He couldn't train properly during a crucial training period. Could be hurt right before competition. All those different factors go into it. So I think we're just going to have to adjust and move forward with it. But I'm really happy for the athletes because, I mean, I can't imagine being an athlete. I mean, being a coach is hard enough because I want to go see my guys compete. I want to see them perform. But this is their lifelong dream, their goal, their mission, something they've invested not just years, but potentially some of them decades or more into getting ready for this games and having it the rug pulled out from underneath you, so to say. But I think it's a real blessing knowing that things are going to move forward and the games will go on. I think that's a very strong message.
Yeah, I mean, the world is watching, and that's an inspiration to the rest of the world to know that they will go on, and that we might somehow continue and get back to normal in one capacity or another. I think that's an important message you guys send by continuing that on. How are the guys handling it? What's the vibe on the team?
I think it's a little all over the place. I think there's some guys that are really grieving this. They're mourning the loss of the Olympics and not looking at it as so much another opportunity to move forward. Which kind of brings me to tip number 2, really, which was turning your complex grief into lamenting. And again, this is the lessons I learned talking to my pastor, which was mourn the loss, grieve it, go through that process of going, okay, this happened. How do I process this internally, and how do I move on? During this time, though, I mean, it could be weary. You could get very tired. We as men, as competitors, we like to compete. We like to not only compete, we like to win. And this feels like a loss. This feels like we lost something. And that's why I think some of the guys are actually grieving this. And we don't like to weep. We don't like to, cry over things. We like to laugh. We want good news, not bad news. And right now we're getting piled on bad news. It's like one thing after another of bad news, and bad news could keep coming even after this virus is gone, like you mentioned before. I mean, our economy could be absolutely tanked. Guys could lose their jobs, and maybe their sponsors that they've been getting sponsored from they're struggling now. Now they don't have extra funds to help athletes out. Same thing with our clubs and our regional training centers, right? I mean, it could get worse before it gets better, for sure. And So the process of turning this complex grief into lamenting is going through those grieving processes and coming out of it emotionally stronger on the other side. You know, as men, we were created to lift burdens from others. As leaders, we're supposed to relieve people of burdens, and so for us, we gotta turn our burdens over to the Lord and go, okay, I'm struggling with this, and it's out of my control, it's out of my hands. And what can I focus on? What can I control? I can control maybe my attitude, the way I'm approaching things. We talked about some ideas earlier about turning this isolation into solitude and really redeeming that time, growing from that time, getting better as a person, getting stronger. Like you said about the soldiers that were, you know, they really redeemed that time, even though that wasn't a choice. It wasn't chosen struggle. It was forced upon them. Same thing here. You know, we're not choosing to be isolated at this time. You know, the situation has forced us upon us, but we have to deal with it. And I think how we deal with that really matters, Rick.
Yeah, listening to what you're saying, it reminds me of a lot. And one thing is that, you know, there's definitely loss there, and it should be grieved properly. I mean, I don't know that a lot of people really understand what athletes put in to preparing for a quadrennial. You know, we talk about it on this show. We're trying to convince guys, trying to convince our young athletes to understand what does it really take to get ready for a quadrennial, because people don't really comprehend that. They think you train up for the 6 months before the Olympics or something. So that's real loss. Guys put, 4 years of their life that they put on hold. They could have been working at a company making money or whatever, and instead they're not, right? That there's opportunity cost, and so it's valid to feel that way because it's real and to mourn that. But I think that the flip side is that this is kind of a unique situation in that as much as there's loss, there is opportunity, right? There is opportunity. Sorry, my dog's barking in the background,
That's
but there's opportunity to still compete, right? And talk to the guys like Lee Kemp or the guys from the 1980 team. There was no other opportunity to compete.
And I, I did watch that show, and I think we discussed it. I can't remember we discussed it offline or on the last episode that we're going to get posted as well. I did go out and watch that show, and I mean, it changed his life. I mean, that missing the 1980 Olympics changed this man's life entirely. It still affects him to this day.
Yeah, and so, these guys, they have an opportunity that team didn't have in full, right? So even though that you lost the opportunity for 2020, you're still in the mix for 2021 or what have you. Like, they still have life. This is great. They still have that opportunity, and as hard as that is to swallow, the guys from the NCAAs this year, maybe not. I don't know how that's all shaken out on the college level, but that's a big deal. And frankly, I think for Greco, you got guys that were setting up to peak right at the right time. And I think you guys were showing a great trajectory with the Pan Ams, but you guys are still an incredibly young team. And I think that, watching the team, I also got the sense that, the whole program was doing everything we could to prop up and just get these guys out there and ready for Tokyo. And man, to have an extra 6 to 8 months, 12 months, that's time to get better. Like, this is time where guys might have gone the difference between being an Olympian and now they could be a medalist, or being a medalist and now being a champion. Cleaning up those little details.
That's how I'm looking at it, but I'm a bit of an optimist, Rick. And I definitely, during this break, I did the Briggs Myers evaluation. I did the Strengths Finder, and what I realized, I shouldn't say realized. I think I realized this, but I think I confirmed it when I got back my profiles and my strengths and my personalities stuff. Looking through that, it's like, oh, and you're 1% of the population, and Okay, I'm 1%. Most people's minds don't think the same way mine does, and good or bad, I guess. I don't know which it is, but I definitely try to look for the silver lining in things and go, how how can we get through this, come out of the other side of it stronger, better, more equipped to grow and improve.
Yeah, I mean you have to though, right? I mean that's a winner's attitude. You've got the mindset of a champion, and that is what 1% is. Our champions are our 1%ers, right? And that's what we want to do. We want to take that championship mindset and make everyone a champion off the mat in life, and bring that down to the other people who might not have that mindset. But it's hard to be a champion if you're full of negativity and pessimism and those kind of things. And that's true just as much for being a champion as it is for handling these situations, that we've been talking about, when you're in these sort of solitary situations. And whether it's solitary by themselves, and there's some people I think out there who might not have family and friends around, or some elderly or other people who literally are in their home, in an apartment, and not in the woods of Oregon where they can walk around. And a lot of apartment people, they can't really walk around. There's not a lot of sort of safe or healthy places for them to do that. And they might really have a solitary experience, but at the same time, there's people who might be in these sort of quarantines with their family. And so they're still isolated in that capacity, but they also still have to work on a lot of teamwork, because you might be in there with just your wife, or maybe your kids, and your uncle, and whoever the extended family is. There might be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people in the household. And that can create a wholly different kind of challenge of isolation. And that's, even the best teams, the best marriages, you have your blowouts, you have your fights, because you care. And, you're going to communicate when things aren't going right. And sometimes there's going to be breakdowns, and that's going to be a challenge I think people have to deal with. But there's ways around that. And part of that, the first step, is maintaining that positive attitude, not giving in to that temptation and negativity or pessimism.
I couldn't agree with you more when you started talking about the different challenges. And I mean, I think you're right. Like, when I was home in Colorado only for a day, because I flew back from our Pan American processes and qualification tournament, and we got our guys qualified there. Got back to Colorado Springs right after the tournament. I was like, okay, you've been out of the country. Don't come to the office for 2 weeks. Send your athletes home, because we want to protect them. We want to look out for our athletes. So let's get those. Well, my next call was to my wife, was get me a ticket to come out to Portland. And her and I came out here for a week, and it was totally different dynamics than when we went back and picked up Robin. And then yesterday, her boyfriend drove out here as well. So now we have different challenges dealing with that. And I know we covered this at some of our camps, Rick, but I would like you just to kind of share the highlights that you learned from your dealing with others in isolation, how you dealt with others, because that's a topic we haven't talked about yet, and you have a lot of experience on. I'd like to have you share that.
Sure. I can talk a little bit about that, and just for context for people who might not be familiar with that. So where that a lot of this information is coming from is we were actually research subjects in a NASA study where we were essentially quarantined for a 45-day mission in a small 600 square foot area with 3 other people, and studied like lab rats and guinea pigs as we simulated a trip to Mars. And the idea is, this is one of NASA's biggest psychology studies, to understand these kinds of issues of teamwork, team cohesion, and what are the ways that humans psychologically handle isolation and confinement together with teamwork in these situations. And we've talked a lot about it here on the show, I guess, over the last couple of years, and at some of the talks we did at the OTC. And now it's kind of interesting, because now there's like a major direct social societal connection of what we're doing here. So it's actually a lot relevant. So some of the there's a lot of small tips and tricks, and I'll kind of ignore them for now, just to try to be brief. Some of the big ideas, though, was one, basically be good to people. And that might sound simple, but once we've all been confined now for at least a week nationally, and it's becomes a little bit more difficult to be good to people. We give into our more human desires at times, and we maybe lose control of our frustrations. So remembering to be good to people, we're all in this together, and everyone's going to have struggles. And that's one thing I've been really encouraged about, watching things nationally play out, is to see that there hasn't been like mass riotings. There haven't been people who seem to be problems yet. And people do have this sense of, I think everyone has a different layer of fear about these things, but I think for the most part, almost no one is a virologist or a molecular biologist. So most people really don't understand what's happening what is it that we should be scared of or concerned about. And I think that gives everyone this shared experience of like, well, we don't know what's happening, but we got to do it together. And we're going to trust the authorities and kind of what they're telling us, but we don't really know what to do otherwise. And I think that has kept a lot of people reminded to treat each other well, because none of us did this to each other, and so we're all in this together. The other thing that really stood out as a lesson that we took forward is to survive these kind of situations of quarantine, confinement, is to really take a teamwork approach. And within the context of team, looking at your family or whoever you are living with as a team, then you're a team member, and whether you're the bottom on the totem pole or you're the leader of the family, taking an approach of service leadership, which is that I'm here to serve others. From my experience, I was a backup member for the crew. I wasn't even on the main crew until the very end. And I took that approach forward of like, well, I'm here as the least. So what can I do as a backup member? Well, I can serve everybody else by planning ahead, finding out, thinking for each person, what do they need now, but what are they going to need in the future, and how can I help them to get ready for that? So putting them and their needs ahead of mine was really useful. And, that didn't just help in terms of followership to help the team, but that is essentially what leadership is. That is leading from the front too. When you're the leader up front, you're the captain or the coach of a team, your job is still to put other people in front. And so that was something that was an important thing. So be good to people, approach it as a team, approach it as teamwork, and think of ways to bring other people peace, and that'll bring you joy. So I'm talking about the times when you're frustrated. I'm talking about the times when other people are frustrated. If it hasn't happened yet, it will. That's normal. It's okay. But if you want to be purely selfish about it and say, how do I make my life more peaceful? How do I get more happiness if other people are frustrating you? Find ways to make them happy. Because if they're happy, you're happy, right? Happy wife, happy life. Serve that spouse, make them happy and bring them peace. It'll bring you joy. And if you bring them joy, then you'll have peace. So those are three big things. A lot of smaller things, be humble. That was really important. So if you're humble, then you're going to not be scared to say, I'm sorry, because you'll know if you screwed up, and you're going to screw up. We're going to make some things happen. We're going to say some things maybe we don't mean, or have things happen living in confinement. It just happens, right? We're not used to this, and nobody's perfect, but be humble, admit it, own your mistakes, put your ego aside, say I'm sorry, and you got to be able to forgive yourself as well. You can't beat yourself up for that. So you do something wrong, you screw up, don't hold yourself hostage. Forgive yourself and forgive the other people, and especially forgive them when they're not forgiving you. We got to be magnanimous, be the bigger person in whatever is happening, and realize that we got to throttle back a little bit in these situations when we're kind of cooped up, cabin fever, got nowhere else to go. A lot of us don't have that Oregon forest to go walk around in, the clam digging in. Throttle back. This isn't the time to pitch political fights. It's not the time for politics or snark or sarcasm. Those are anxieties coming out. Those are our problems coming out in veiled ways.
That's the fear.
Yeah, and that's not fair to other people. Metacognition, our ability to think about ourselves and think about others, to realize that and kind of hold that in check. but it's a time to practice that metacognition, practice being psychologically resilient, stretch ourselves a little bit more.
Excuse me.
Bless you.
Hope that's not a sign of the coronavirus, but just a little sneezing.
Sure. So those are things those are the big, say big five, what have you. That humility, say I'm sorry, ask for help if you're struggling. Other people are going to see you struggle. They know you're struggling. Just ask for help. Hey, I need a little help today. I'm struggling. Can you give me man, isn't that nice to hear when you see somebody else struggling, and at least you know that they know, and then you're happy to help them then, because then that makes your life easier too. It lets other people know that you're open, and that you're open for input, you're open for help. And we've all been in those times when a teammate or a family member, somebody else is struggling, and we want to offer help, and then they put that wall up, and you're like, man, I just want to help, I'm trying to do something, and they push you. That's hard. But if you can offer and say, hey, I'm having a hard day, can I have some help? Can you help me with this or that? I need a break maybe. Do you mind doing the dishes today? I'm exhausted. Man, then it lets the other people know that you're open and have conscientiousness, and that you're not putting that wall up. And doesn't that help?
Yeah, I think it helps, and I think it brings me to my third tip, which is turn fear into faith. And we started out talking about turning isolation into solitude, and that's not just being alone, but being with the Lord, and being thinking about how you can improve your position, taking complex grief and turning it into lamentations and lamentating. And the last tip that I had, and these were all from talking to Pastor Mark, which was turn fear into faith. I mean, right now you said like all this uncertainty creates fear. We want to know what's going on because we want to be in control, and we're not in control at all. We are not in control. There are certain things that we can control. It's the way we treat others, the attitude that we approach this with. There are a lot of things that we can control, but we are not at all in control of this situation. And fear is not healthy. I think it, in the Bible, it talks about that one command more than any other command is do not fear. Only fear the Lord. Do not be afraid. But usually when it says do not be afraid, it says for God is with you, for I am with you. And we can all have that presence of the Lord through the Spirit. And fear invites the spirit of fear. Like when you're scared, you invite the spirit of fear, and it's pretty much a demonic spirit. There's arguments that maybe one of the demons was named Fear. That was just literally his name, Fear. Whether it was or not, there's a couple other named demons in the Bible. I think Lucifer was one of them, but they don't name a lot of the demons, probably rightfully so. But knowing that we don't control much, so focus on what we are capable of controlling, and just turning this situation over to prayer and saying, I know I'm not in control. You are, Lord. Take this from it, and stop inviting the fear into your life by, really limit the amount of news content you're reading. I notice when I get a little more anxiety, a little more stressed out when I start, turning on I don't have TV for a reason. I haven't had TV since 2007, and I know that about me, and that's why I got rid of it. But then it seeps back into you because now I got YouTube and Twitter and all these things, so I can get this same fear-inducing spirits coming into my life as well, even though I get rid of the one television. Well, now I've got YouTube, and I've got an iPad, I got an iPhone here, and an iPad here, I got a computer. It's like we are so plugged in and connected. But be careful, I think, that what you're inviting into your life. Are you inviting the spirit of fear, or are you inviting like the Holy Spirit into your life to comfort you? And that's why God sent the Holy Spirit. The Father, the Son, the Spirit. But He sent the Spirit as a comforter. To take away that fear, because I am with you. So I think turning faith into fear is really that third tip. Just talking to Mark and saying, what are some tips in dealing with this, and how do I get better? And certainly I got those slides from the presentation you did. I'll add those into this podcast. But just anything else you want to share with our listeners before we go on, and hopefully, we can get another one out this week, and maybe things turn around and we get some good positive news. But really, the only good news is that we have a Savior. I mean, that is the good news. But hopefully, there's some more positive news coming our way here in the near future for our society.
Yeah, I mean, I think he hit a lot of great points. There's a couple practicalities, and excuse me if I'm looking to my left. One of the things we did right before this whole thing happened is we got a little puppy, and it's running around like crazy right now. So just keeping an eye on him. But here, let me get him 1 second here. He doesn't want to come play. Anyways, make sure he's okay there. Sorry about that. So the couple practical points. On like have a daily plan. Like treat it like work. If you have to work from home, then work from home. Wear your work attire maybe depending on the situation, but create a little bit of a schedule for yourself and try to follow it so that you're not just kind of like meandering through the day and giving into those temptations and distractions, right? I'm
struggling with that. Let me tell you, I am definitely struggling with that. When I first got to town, I stayed the night in Portland with my daughter. I'm trying to get work done, doing Skype calls. I like her dogs are running around. It's chaotic. So I was like, okay, I'm getting out of here. We get down to the cabin, internet's struggling, and it's just one struggle after another. And
and I think
get
teamwork, right? And I think that's where teamwork can come in too, right? So if you live with other people, or even if you have a digital community, right? Like, you can ask for help and say, and by making a plan, be like, all right, so Angie, here's what I'm doing from 10 to 12. I'm really going to focus on work today, and then we'll get some lunch. We'll go clam dig. We'll have a good time. But like, I want to try to do the couple things that I need to take care of today. And then if somebody else sees that you're maybe off task a little bit, they can help in a little of that accountability we talked about throughout the podcasts in the past of like, hey, remember I thought, we got to be doing this from 10 to 12 or something, because it is hard. When you're working from home, work blends into home, and then, it can be difficult. I do it all the time as a professor. I work from home all the time. I've written scientific discoveries from my laptop in coffee shops around the country and around the world in different countries as we travel. So it's really hard. Little tips and trick I found even along that is like, keep the place clean, because it'll keep your mind clean if you have a clean workspace, because you got to look at your house is now your workshop.
I'm writing a couple notes down because I'm going to add them to the video description. So keep your workplace clean.
Well, yeah, because you're now working in your workshop. So let's say you're a carpenter, so to speak, whatever your craft is, but now that's at home. And so if I'm a carpenter and I'm cutting wood and I've got sawdust everywhere in the shop, and I don't clean up that shop until the end of the day when I go home from work, right, at the wood shop. But now that wood shop is your home. You've got sawdust everywhere, so to speak. And so that makes it hard to live, because now you're living in a place full of that proverbial sawdust of whatever your mess is from work. But then that makes your home all scattered. And then when you try to work, everything around you is scattered then too, which can help to make a little bit more scatterbrained, easier to be distracted. So for me, that's a little sort of hack I figured out is I try to make sure I try to clean things and keep it tidy, because clean workspace has a clean mind, and it's a little bit more able to get things done. So make a plan, try to stick to it, and work together as a team to kind of hold accountability to that plan. Try to keep things clean around. In terms of the teamwork, if people are getting a little frustrated or stir crazy cabin fever with people, I think that there's two things to remember. One is, even when you're in a house of 6 people cooped up, really try to carve out some private time for yourself. Whether that's putting your headset in and go watching a little movie, or listening to some music on your own. Put a towel over your head if you need to, and just go to your Zen place. But find some isolation if you have too many people around, because that can be a thing. You have too many people cooped up in a place, you're not isolated at all. It's too many people, and you still need your private time. On the flip side, carve out and schedule some time for the team to come together, for that family, and say, hey, we're going to play a board game tonight, or at lunch we're going to play cards, or we're going to do something, or talk about a book we read, or share some scripture, or whatever it is that your group does that they can bond over. Make sure you do carve out some team time and carve out some individual time too. That's really important to balance, like it is when we're not in confinement. Remember, music can do wonderful things, right? Even if you're all in a fight, in a bad mood, or whatever, a good station of some music can, put a smile on people's face, maybe get everyone cleaning together or doing something. And it also works individually. You're in a bad, put some music on that can be calming in your own head. Those are little things that are sort of practical outside of the deeper stuff that we've been talking about. Really seeing things as opportunities instead of obligations, keeping that positive attitude, keeping your ego checked, and being resilient, and knowing that, hey guys, talk about this as a team. We're going to have, what are some of the roadblocks we see as a team that we might come up against? Is there something that's been frustrating for us? Is there an issue that we think is going to be recurring? And now we know when it comes up, we've talked about it, and we've even talked about some tips. And so maybe the threat to the team cohesion, the family cohesion, is that we just get frustrated with each other. Maybe it's just getting on each other's nerves. So if I get on your nerves, and we talk about it ahead of time, then I know that if you say, hey, this is one of those times where we talked about maybe getting some space between each other, now it's not so much a surprise to me. I'm like, oh no, I get it. We're going to make this work. And just be introspective. Think about what you can do to maybe change something. When we went into confinement for the NASA study, I realized that I'm a very energetic person, and coffee helps that. But it's too energetic. So I stopped coffee. I used it a little bit here and there when we needed to in the mission, but for the most part, that meant that I was more peaceful, and I was more of an introvert, and those are good traits to have in these sorts of situations. So talk less, listen more. And if you do everything you can to try to listen to the other people and what are they going through, then that can really, really help. Because when we're isolated and we're confined and we can't get out, it's different than what life is like, where we can fire someone, we can quit our job, we can escape. We can't escape. It means we have to work extra hard to take another person's point of view 2-3 times and say, how are they going to react if I say this next thing? And if I can see that they're going to react badly because I can listen to what they're going through, or see and read what their state of mind is in, then maybe I can salvage that by being a little magnanimous and saying, you know what, I'm right in this, and I'm justified to say this next thing, or to, clarify the record, or whatever's happening in that little fight or issue or discussion. I have every right and justification to say that, but I'm going to be magnanimous. I'm going to take it on the chin, and we're just going to let this one go because it's going to help us all get along better right now. And there's times when, you certainly need to speak up and have courage and be accountable to do the right thing. But we can be magnanimous in these situations, listen more than speaking. I think that, when times get hard, so we did it for a 45-day mission. We're only at, a week now in America? Times are going to get tougher if this goes.
I think I'm at 11 days. I'm 11 days, but...
Yeah, okay. So, these things can help, There's exceptions to all the rules in that regard, but those are the things that so my sort of bullet list of stuff that comes to mind. And at the end of the day, be good to people, Yeah.
Well,
sucks.
Rick, thank you so much for taking the time and getting on our call today.
Thank you, Matt. It's an honor.